I never planned on staying late that Tuesday. It was one of those days when the sky pressed low, the kind of gray that made every hallway light hum louder. I should have gone home, microwaved something, maybe scrolled until I fell asleep. But I didn't. I lingered, half on purpose. The classroom smelled faintly of old chalk and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She was at her desk, papers spread like fallen leaves, red pen tapping quietly. Mrs. Hale, my literature professor. 45, maybe older, sharp in ways that weren't just about intellect. Hair tied back loosely, strands slipping down by her cheek. Glasses perched low, like they weren't really for seeing but for holding distance. I'd stayed behind under the pretense of finishing a paragraph for my essay. Truth was, I'd written 3 words in 20 minutes. My pen kept pausing, hovering. My attention bent toward the sound of her turning pages, the way her hand brushed her temple as if brushing away thoughts. "You're distracted," she said without looking up. Her voice didn't accuse, not exactly. It was softer, observational, like she just noted the weather. I froze with the pen halfway to the page. My first instinct was denial, but my mouth, traitorous, said instead, "Not when you're talking." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was alert, like the room itself leaned in. She finally lifted her eyes, met mine across the gap of desks. And I swear I felt caught, as though she could read every pause I carried that day. Her lips quirked, not quite a smile. She returned to her grading, pen scratching faintly. "Flattery doesn't finish essays," she murmured. I didn't answer. I folded the corner of my notebook page, unfolded it again. My hand kept doing it, restless, betraying me. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You always sit like you're halfway gone," she said after a while. "Even when you're here." That one landed deeper than she knew. Because it was true. I was the kind of person who drafted texts but never hit send. Who paused mid-thought and convinced himself the world wasn't waiting to hear anyway. I wanted to tell her that. Instead, I just said, "Maybe I like listening more." She looked at me again, then, a little longer this time. There was something unreadable in her eyes. Something that made me shift in my seat like I'd been caught stealing warmth. Her red pen paused over a sentence, and she exhaled slowly, like she'd been carrying the weight of other people's words all day. "Then you should listen to yourself once in a while," she said. I didn't know how to reply. My throat felt tight, so I just nodded, staring at the lines I hadn't written. My pen tapped against the desk, small and nervous. The clock above the door ticked too loudly. Students outside laughed as they passed down the hall. But in here, the air was thick with something I couldn't name. Finally, she gathered her papers, stacking them neatly. "You should head out," she said, softer now. "It's late." I packed my bag slower than I needed to, aware of her movements, the way her fingers brushed dust from the desk, the faint tiredness in her shoulders. She walked with me to the door, as though by routine. And just before I stepped out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text lit the screen. "You forgot your thermos." I hadn't noticed I'd left it behind, but she had. I looked back. She stood in the doorway, holding it loosely by the handle, eyes waiting. That was the first time I realized leaving something behind could be a kind of invitation. She handed me the thermos like it was nothing, but her fingers lingered a second longer than necessary. Just a brush skin against skin, enough to make the air shift. "Don't make a habit of leaving things behind," she said, tone light, almost teasing. "Maybe I do it on purpose," I muttered before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked up, quick, assessing. Then she let out a soft laugh, low, guarded. "Careful. That sounds like the kind of thing you'll regret saying later." We both stood there a moment too long in the doorway. Eventually, she stepped aside, and I walked into the dim hallway, thermos warm in my hand. But the truth was, her words followed me home. Regret, the warning in them. The next time it happened was less accidental. I stayed after class again, telling myself I just needed help clarifying a passage in the reading. She looked tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. A mug of tea steamed beside her, scent faintly herbal. "You really don't like going home, do you?" she asked without looking up. I hesitated, then shrugged. "It's quiet there." That wasn't the whole truth. Quiet wasn't the right word. Hollow, maybe. A roommate who was never around. My phone filled with messages I drafted and erased. I didn't tell her any of that, but something in the way she glanced at me made me think she heard it anyway. She pushed the mug toward me. You should drink. You look pale. I wanted to protest. It was her tea, her space. But she was already turning back to her papers, so I lifted it carefully, holding in both hands. The warmth steadied me. I sipped, and the taste was sharper than I expected, almost bitter. You drink this every night? I asked. Most nights, she said. It reminded me of my grandmother. She used to brew the same kind, strong enough to keep you awake and put you to sleep, depending on how you needed it. Her voice softened at that last part. She smiled faintly, not at me, but at some memory I couldn't see. Something in me ached. I imagined her younger, smaller, watching an older woman prepare tea in a dim kitchen. It felt too intimate, picturing her like that. I think she'd like you, she added suddenly. The words landed heavy. I didn't know what to say, so I stared at the rim of the mug, at my reflection warped in the dark liquid. My mind kept circling the risk of it, the obvious math of our ages, the fact that she was divorced and respected, that I was just another student who should have known better. But none of that stopped me from wishing the silence between us could stretch longer. When I set the mug back on her desk, my fingers brushed hers again. Neither of us moved for a beat. She cleared her throat. You should get going. I stood, gathering my bag, and as I did, she said it so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. You're easy to talk to. I carried that sentence with me longer than I should have, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next week, the classroom was already half empty when I came in. She stood by the window, blinds tilted just enough for late light to cut across the room. Her hair was loose this time, falling to her shoulders. It startled me how much younger she looked without the strict frame of pins holding it back. I sat down, but my focus didn't hold. The way her hand rested against the sill, fingers tapping faintly, drew me more than the text in front of me. You're late, she said without turning. Not really. My voice cracked faintly. I cleared it. Just slower today. She turned then, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something flickered there, concern, amusement, something heavier. You always come back, she said, softer this time. It should have been a harmless observation, but it landed like an accusation, or a warning. I like the quiet. I answered, though even I didn't believe that was all of it. Her mouth curved slightly, though her eyes didn't follow. She gathered some books, setting them in a stack. You know this isn't, she stopped, shaking her head. Never mind. What? I asked too quickly. Nothing, she said, sharper now. It's nothing. The space between us filled with that word, nothing, and I hated it. My hands fidgeted with the zipper of my bag. She noticed, of course she did. A knock on the door cut through the air. Another student poked his head in, grinning. Hey, Prof, do you have the syllabus from last term? Can't find mine. She smiled, polite, professional, and I watched her shift instantly into the role the world expected of her. Her voice even distant. By the time he left, my chest fell hollow. She sighed, pressing her palms flat on the desk. See, this is what I mean. People notice things. They always notice. Her words weren't for me exactly, but I felt them like they were. I wanted to say, I don't care if they notice. Instead, I looked down, nails scratching faintly against the wood. The silence stretched. She rubbed at her temple. You should keep a little distance. I nodded slowly, though the motion felt like betrayal. And yet, when I bent to pick up a book that had slipped from my desk, she knelt too, reaching at the same time. Our hands brushed. Not just brushed, stayed. For a second too long. Her fingers curled slightly, like she'd forgotten herself. When she realized, she pulled back fast, standing before I could. Her breath caught, barely audible. Careful, she said, voice low, but it trembled on the edges. I rose slowly, holding the book to my chest. I should have stepped away. Instead, I met her eyes. Neither of us moved. The air felt charged, humming. My mouth opened, words almost there, but nothing came out. She turned first, breaking the gaze, fussing with papers that didn't need fussing. You should go, she whispered. I stood there rooted, wanting, afraid, and when I finally walked out, the echo of her almost touch burned more than any words could. It was raining the evening it finally broke open. Not a heavy storm, just that steady kind of drizzle that makes everything smell of wet concrete and leaves. I found her standing under the awning outside the building, bag slung over her shoulder, staring at the street like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. "You don't have an umbrella?" I asked, stepping up beside her. She glanced at me, a faint smile tugging her mouth. I wasn't planning on waiting this long. I opened mine, the cheap black one I carried more out of habit than need. "We can share," I offered, lifting it slightly. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, almost reluctantly, she stepped in closer, careful not to brush against me, though the narrow circle of dry space forced it anyway. We walked in silence, the rain tapping above us, shoes splashing faintly against uneven pavement. My shoulder brushed hers once, then again, until I stopped trying to correct the distance. Halfway down the block, she said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." "Here where?" "Next to me. Like this." Her voice was even, but her hand gripped the strap of her bag too tightly. I swallowed. "Do you want me to leave?" She didn't answer right away. Her breath came out slow, visible in the chill. "It's not about what I want." That silence that followed, it felt like it carried years inside it. I don't know what came over me then. Maybe the smell of rain, or the way the streetlights blurred in puddles, or just the nearness of her shoulder brushing mine again. But I said it, low and almost breaking, "I think about you. More than I should." Her steps faltered. She stopped altogether, pulling me to a halt under the weak glow of a street lamp. Rain misted at the edges of the umbrella, dampening her hair. She looked at me, really looked as if searching for a reason to dismiss it. Instead, her voice came out quieter than mine. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to say that?" Probably, I admitted. My throat felt tight, but the words didn't stop. "But it doesn't change that it's true." She shook her head, almost laughing but not. More like disbelief at herself. "God, you're—" She cut off, pressing a hand to her face. Her fingers lingered at her temple, then slid down to her mouth, like she could hold the words in. "I'm what?" I asked. Too quick, too desperate. Her hand dropped. Her eyes softened, and that was worse, because it wasn't rejection. It was recognition. "You're too young," she said finally. I almost laughed, but it caught in my chest. "And you're too—" I stopped myself, but the word hung anyway. Too much, too distant, too impossible. She turned her face away, toward the rain. The umbrella tilted, and a few drops landed cold on my sleeve. Her voice came out like a sigh. "Do you really know what you're asking for?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the question wasn't really for me. It was hanging there, trembling for both of us. The rain passed, but she didn't come to class the next day, or the one after. I told myself it was nothing, grading, department meetings, a cold maybe. But the empty desk at the front of the room was like a missing tooth, small, but impossible not to notice. When she finally returned, she was different. Not visibly. Her hair was pinned back again, glasses in place, voice steady. But she kept the distance too clean. No after-class lingering, no soft comments meant only for me. She dismissed the room with a briskness that almost felt rehearsed. I waited anyway, standing by my desk, shoving papers into my bag slower than I ever had. When the last student filed out, she was already gathering her things, eyes locked anywhere but mine. "You're quiet," I said, trying to sound casual. Her hands stilled on the stack of folders. Then, without looking up, she said, "You should focus on your work." It wasn't sharp. It was worse, flat, like she'd already decided on something I wasn't part of. The words sat between us like a wall. I wanted to push, to ask what had shifted. But then she added, softer, "I have a daughter, you know. She's only a few years younger than you." That sentence stopped everything. I nodded, though I didn't know what I was nodding to. My throat felt lined with gravel. "I'm not saying this to shame you," she went on, still not meeting my eyes. "But sometimes it helps to remember where the line is." The line. That was what she called it. I left before I could say anything foolish. My hands kept clenching in my pockets on the walk home, unclenching again. That night, I opened my phone 3 times, typing words I couldn't send. "I don't care about the line. I don't care about age. I just care about you." Each draft hovered on the screen until I erased it. The next week, I stopped staying after. It wasn't discipline, it was survival. I thought maybe the space would dull it, but the silence only made it sharper. She never looked for me when class ended, and I never gave her the chance to. Once I saw her in the courtyard. She was sitting alone on a bench, sunlight catching in her hair. For a moment, she looked not older, not unreachable, just human. Her hand hovered at her phone, thumb tracing the edge but never unlocking it. I almost walked over, almost sat down beside her, but my feet didn't move. Later, in my apartment, I opened a blank message again. This time, I wrote only 2 words, still here. The cursor blinked after it, waiting longer than it should have. But I never hit send, because the truth was, I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was late when it happened, later than either of us would usually linger. I was cutting across campus, the night air sharp with the smell of damp leaves, when I saw her outside the faculty building. She was standing by the bike racks, fumbling with her keys. The streetlight above her buzzed, flickering every few seconds. I almost walked past, almost convinced myself she wouldn't want to see me. But something in the way her shoulders hunched stopped me. "Forgot where you parked?" I asked softly. She jumped a little, then exhaled when she saw me. "No, just can't find the right key." She laughed once under her breath, a small sound that died quickly. Story of my life. I stepped closer, not too close. She finally picked the right key, but didn't use it. Just held it, turning it in her hand. "Why'd you stop staying after class?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was level, but there was a catch under it. I looked down at my shoes. "Thought maybe you wanted me to." "I didn't," she said. Then, quieter, almost swallowed, "But maybe I should have." The silence that followed stretched thin, fragile. I could feel every second of it in my chest. "You scare me," she admitted then. So quietly I almost missed it. I looked up. "Why?" Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag. "Because I forget the rules when you're around. And I can't afford to forget." I want to tell her it wasn't rules that kept me awake at night. It was the memory of her hand brushing mine, the curve of her voice when she let her guard slip. Instead, what came out was, my throat tightened. "I just don't want this to end without saying it." Her eyes found mine in the half-light. Not angry, not surprised, just unbearably tired and honest. "Say what?" "That I look forward to you," I said. My voice cracked. Every time, even when I tell myself not to. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes like she needed to shield herself from the weight of it. When she opened them again, something softer had broken through. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. I know. Neither of us moved. The key was still in her hand, her knuckles pale around it. Finally, she sat on top of the bike rack, emptying her fingers. "You're too young for me," she said again, but it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like confession. "And you're—" I stopped. The word felt too large, too clumsy. "You're you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, almost unwillingly, her hand lifted. She brushed the damp sleeve of my jacket, just once, as if checking whether I was really there. Her lips parted like she might say more, but she didn't. Instead, she just gave the smallest smile. The kind that said, "I hear you. I feel it too. But this is all we can allow." I nodded. "Okay." And that was the end. Not closure. Not collapse. Just okay. Weeks passed, classes ended, new ones began. At first, we only shared small fragments of time. A glance when we crossed paths, a good morning outside the building at 8:47 sharp, when her coffee steamed in one hand and her satchel tugged at her shoulder. Those tiny rhythms stitched themselves into something sturdier than either of us admitted out loud. She stopped telling me to keep my distance. I stopped pretending I'd already let go. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single night where we crossed some burning line. It was quieter, like rain soaking into the ground. One evening, I knocked at her office door, not after class, but hours later when the halls were empty. She looked surprised to see me, but didn't send me away. Instead, she poured tea, the same bitter kind she once said reminded her of her grandmother. I still didn't love the taste, but I drank it anyway, letting the warmth sit heavy in my hands. "This is becoming a habit," she said softly. "Bad one?" I asked. Her smile was small, tired, but not guarded this time. Not bad, just unexpected. We sat there long after the tea cooled, silence stretching easy instead of heavy. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to chase her words. They came when they wanted. I realized then that what we had wasn't about declarations. It was about staying. By spring, it was normal to find her waiting on the bench near the courtyard. Sometimes she'd bring a thermos of coffee for me, black and a little too strong because she remembered. Sometimes I'd bring the umbrella, even if the forecast promised sun. We never called it anything, but the air between us softened, unknotted. There was no ceremony, no sudden collapse into forever. Just slow, steady choosing. I helped her carry groceries one weekend. She handed me the lighter bags, though I could have carried them all. Inside her apartment, books stacked high on every surface, she pressed a mug of tea into my hand and laughed when I winced at the bitterness. "You'll get used to it," she said. I wasn't sure I ever would. But that wasn't the point. The point was she remembered, and I stayed. Looking back now, I can't trace the exact moment it changed, when longing became something lived, not imagined. Maybe it was the night under the street lamp. Maybe it was the first thermos she noticed I left behind. Or maybe it was just all the small pauses we never walked away from. Either way, it's not perfect. It's not easy, but it's real, and it's ours. Sometimes, when the tea is too bitter or the coffee too black, we catch each other's eyes and share the smallest smile. The kind that says, "We remember how it started." And that's enough. 2.